Hey everyone, welcome back to bageltcg. Today we're going to be doing a deck tech on the classic constructed Rhinar. I call it high roll Rhinar. It's an aggressive Rhinar build that seeks to utilize the new cards from Everfest that use rolling, right? Dice rolling. But first, before we get into the deck tech, I want to give a shout out to my sponsor, Whipped Wizard. They have great prices on singled and sealed, really fast shipping and great customer service. So use the affiliate link in my description to check them out and support the channel. So let's get into the deck list here. You may have noticed I also have the cards above me now, so a little less scuffed. I'm always going to be a little scuffed. My focus is on strategy, but I'm trying to help increase my production value a little. And I can understand how these might be a little hard to read, might be a little smaller. They're even smaller now that I've shrunk it over here, and it's even smaller, right? But hopefully now you'll be able to read the cards up here as I talk about them. So as always, we're going to start with the loadout here and the equipment. So Rhinar's kind of default equipment for most of the time is going to be Mandible Claw. So his game plan here is to be aggressive, and this helps you go wide. It does 3 damage for the cost of 2, but if you discarded a card with cost 6 or more, or with power 6 or more, I should say, it has go again. So you run 2 of them, they're one-handed. You'll be able to come in for 6 with 4 resources, but the upside here, 6 for 4 resources isn't amazing. I mean, Anathos is 6 for 3 resources, right? But we have a lot of cards that just buff all brute attacks, right? Not just attack actions, but all brute attacks. We'll get into some of those here, but buffing all brute attacks means your brute weapons are buffed as well, and any buff is doubled because you have 2 weapons, right? So instead of just giving +2 to your one-handed weapon, you'll give +2 to both of your weapons, which ends up being +4 total across the 2 weapons, right? So really great to have these, and we're going to have them in most of the time. Outside of that, we've got these romping clubs here. Romping club is going to be useful whenever we're trying to, block a little more. It takes a lot of resources to come in with Mandible Claw. Mandible Claw costs, 4 total resources, like I said, to come in both times. And against decks where we're blocking a ton, we don't have the resources usually to do that. So when we're blocking a lot, we're just going to bring in Romping Club. This is against some of the more aggressive decks, against, like maybe a Briar that's coming in or a Katsu. If we can't really, outrace them, we might have to try to block them a little here. And Romping Club helps us still put out some damage through our weapon. We can block with 3 cards from hand and then use our last card to come in for 4. Which is a pretty fine rate, and it's better than doing nothing if we just have 1 card and can't do anything with it, right? So pretty solid there, and I'm happy to include this in pretty much any Rhinar build. After that, we've got Arcanite Skullcap here. This is kind of the standard headpiece, but we're actually running 3 different headpieces in our build. But this is going to be kind of the standard one. This lets us block for 3 total, right? It'll block for 2 the first time if we're at less life, and then block for 1 after. Pretty standard piece of equipment for most decks. Really happy to run this and just be able to block well with our headpiece. That usually isn't a blocking slot. So Yendel's Spring Tunic is going to be our chest piece. This is also pretty standard for most decks now. We're running both the legendary generic cards, right? But this gives us a free resource every 3 turns. It also will block for 1 once and then will break due to Blade Break. But a free resource is pretty nice, especially when we have these kind of awkward 4 resource breakpoints, right? Like Mandible Claw costs 4 total to swing with both. This will be nice because we don't have any way to discount that. So sometimes, usually we'll just have to pitch 2 cards. But Yendel's Spring Tunic will let us just pitch a blue and then gain the resource from Tunic. We also have a few really important 1-cost cards that draw cards for our deck. And Yendel's Spring Tunic will allow us to use the resource from Tunic to draw those cards without having to waste cards pitching. And that can be really helpful when we're trying to use Blood Rush Bellows and Art of War, which are our draw cards, and you'll see them later on here. Next we have Null Rune Hood. Not a lot to say here. This is for basically just the Rune Blades. Against Rune Blade, you'll want AV1, so you'll be running this against those decks. Pretty good. Nice to have it here. I'm not sure it's 100% necessary, but this deck is still kind of in its early stages. I think it's really, really powerful, but I don't think it's solved by any means, and I don't think I'm an amazing enough Rhinar player to solve it. So, but yeah, I think these are good, and it's probably going to be correct to have these in case of any sort of rune blade, right? I'm going to take my glasses off here because I realize you probably can't see my eyes at all with the glare on them, and I look like a bug. Moving on, we've got, let's see, we've got the important scab skin leathers. So these next two equipment pieces are kind of the two most important ones in the deck. These are our legendary brute legs. They have battle worn too, so they'll block for 2 and then for 1. And they have the once per turn action. For 0 resources, you roll a 6-sided die. You gain action points equal to half the number rolled, rounded down, right? So the only really bad number to roll is a 1. A 1 rounded down is 0, so you would just end your turn. You would run out of action points. So you basically never want to roll a 1, but rolling a 2 still gives you 1 action point, which basically does nothing because this uses an action point itself and doesn't have go again. So if you roll a 2 or a 3, it basically did nothing other than roll a dice. If you roll a 0, or I mean if you roll a 1, I should say, you're kind of screwed for that turn. And if you roll a 4, 5, or 6, you'll get 2 action points for 4 or 5. So you'll be able to do 2 actions, play 2 different cards, even if they don't have go again, or swing with 2 weapons. And if you roll a 6, you will get 3 action points, which is pretty incredible. So really good card. Basically, this deck is trying to just maximize its RNG value. I think we've learned from Starvo being in the meta that sometimes some good RNG can help you out. So you want to roll this almost every turn. Don't roll it if you can't use those action points. If you only have 1 card in hand, if you can't attack twice with the 2 action points, there's no point in using it. But if you have the ability, if you have like 3 or 4 cards and you can get use out of it, you want to roll this. Obviously, rolling a 1 sucks, but if you're gonna roll 1s, you're gonna roll 1s, and that's gonna be bad. But when you roll 5s and 6s, you're gonna win those games. So it's kind of worth the risk here just to be able to have this piece of equipment and just get those free action points. To go along with it is the new Everfest Brute Arms, which are Skull Crushers, right? So Skull Crushers block for 1 with Battle Worn, so they'll block for 1 and stick around. And then they have the effect whenever you roll a 5 or a 6 on a die, your brute attacks gain +1 this turn. So this is the first part I was talking about where it just says brute attacks, which includes weapons. So if you roll your scab skins and you roll a 5 or a 6, not only do you gain 2 or 3 action points, depending on a 5 or a 6, but you will also give your mandible claws both +1. So really good effect here. And you're basically, this is one of the main reasons why we want to roll our scab skin leathers every turn, is because we're getting that consistent, hopefully consistent +1, or at least consistent action points, right? The second effect is a pretty significant downside, but it's once again worth the risk. Same downside of rolling a 1 on scab skin leathers, in the fact that if you roll a 1, you're kind of screwed. Basically, in this case, if you roll a 1, it's destroyed. So I definitely recommend blocking with this early. It has Battle Worn, so when you block with it, it'll stick around. And then when you end up rolling a 1 at some point and it destroys itself, you won't have lost that 1 point of block value. So there's a reason this has Battle Worn. It's because it can just destroy itself sometimes. So you want to block with it early. Use it to block a breakpoint. They swing in with a 4 damage attack that has an on-hit trigger. Even if it's turn 2 or 3, you'll want to block it with this and a 3 block. Usually it's a pretty bad idea to block with equipment early, but this is kind of the exception because it's going to destroy itself at some point. Hopefully not, but you have to plan for that, right? So really good top effect though, and it's kind of what incentivizes us to go just balls to the wall, rolling dice as much as possible, and just trying to get that 5 or 6. And you will note it's not a once per turn, so if you roll 2 or 3 dice on your turn through the various effects that Brute has to roll dice, it will get +1 multiple times, right? So if you roll 2 5s in a turn, or 2 6s, or any combination of that, you'll give all your brute attacks +2 or +3. There's not a lot of ways to roll dice that many times. Our main way of rolling dice is scab skin leathers, so typically this will only happen once. But you could draw, double Rolling Thunder, which is a card we'll get to, and then roll a bunch of 5 or 6s and have just an incredibly explosive turn. This deck probably has the most explosive power in the game. It also has the most low roll potential. So if you're someone who tilts really hard from randomness, definitely don't recommend this deck. But I don't tilt super hard. I just kind of have fun. If I have a bad day, That's how it is. I'm here to have some fun games, so I'm rolling those dice. I'm smiling the whole time. I'm going, hey, we got a 5, we got a 6, and then we go, oh, we got a 1. It's okay, you know, I'll pass my turn and we'll block or whatever. So definitely not a deck for the weak or faint of heart, I guess. But if you enjoy some good dice rolls and some really high rolls where you roll a 6 on Scabskin, a 6 on Rolling Thunder, all your attacks get +2 this turn. You have 3 action points. You can just do some incredible stuff with this deck. I'm going to stop ranting about Skull Crushers now and look at Skullhorn, which is the last of our equipment pieces. So Skullhorn here, it's a headpiece. It has Arcane Barrier 2, so this will come in against Wizard. I'm not sure exactly all the matchups this comes in against. I just know sometimes it'll be useful. Maybe against decks you don't really want to block a lot if it's not an aggressive deck and you don't feel like blocking them much. Maybe like a Prism or something. I'm not exactly sure all the decks that you would want this against. Maybe Oldham. Decks where you're not blocking as much. You could bring this in definitely against Wizard, obviously. As an action, you can destroy it, draw a card, and discard a random card, go again. So this is kind of a free way to trigger a lot of our effects that say when you discard a card that's 6 or 6 power or greater, right? So it'll trigger Rhinar. Rhinar says when you discard a card with 6 or more power during your action phase, intimidate. So this will trigger Rhinar. We have other effects that this will trigger. It'll trigger Romping Club, which gets +1 when you've discarded a card with 6 or more power. So it'll trigger various things. It'll also sort through your hand, but mostly it's here for this AB2, and then that effect is good against decks that are blocking well. Or not blocking well, I should say. Not putting out a lot of damage, and you don't need to block well. So we're going to move on to the main deck here. So Alpha Rampage is really good against controlling decks, and probably not as playable against aggressive decks. So basically it costs 3, which is a lot, and you have to discard a card to play it. You'll discard a random card. So this is 3 cards to do this effect. You'll pitch a blue, you'll play this, and you'll discard a card. So you're committing 3 whole cards to dealing 9 damage. If you discard a card that had 6 or more power, you will intimidate twice because of Rhinar's ability, and then this also has Intimidate. So it's good against control decks because Intimidate's especially good against control decks that want to block, and you're just intimidating the cards out of their hands. But against aggressive decks, it's just a lot of resources to commit to some damage. And Intimidate is a lot worse against aggressive decks because they're not blocking you anyways. Like, they truly don't care if you're intimidating cards out of their hand because they weren't going to block with those in the first place. So really good against decks that do want to block you, and against decks that you don't think are gonna block you, you'll take the 3 Alpha Rampages out here. Next up, we have the 3 Barraging Beatdowns. I've got them right here. Wow, look how cool that is. The Barraging Beatdown is a 0-cost brute action. It has Go Again, it intimidates, and it makes your next brute attack gain. If this attack is defended by less than 2 non-equipment cards, it gains either +2, +3 for the yellow, or +4 for the red. So great effect there. It's really great to this also works on your equipment, like I was saying. It won't work on both claws, but it'll be great effect. It's actually pretty nice against aggro, so even though the Intimidate doesn't matter as much, you can keep a 2-card hand, any yellow or blue in this. You'll play this, so this will be a 0 for potentially +4. They don't want to block, and the effect happens if they don't block with 2 cards from their hand or from their arsenal. So they will have they'll be incentivized not to block because they're an aggressive deck, but if they don't, this will punish them because they'll take, for example, if you're running Romping Club, they'll take 8 damage off of 2 cards, which is a great value. Next up is Command and Conquer. Command and Conquer is a 6 power card, so it works with our deck. It has a great effect, and right now it's unfortunately a little less relevant because of Crown of Seeds. But I think you'll play it against almost every other deck, so except Chain maybe, because Chain has Carrion Husk. But outside of Oldham and Starvo, who can Crown of Seeds their arsenal away, and then maybe Chain, you're going to play this against every other deck. It's a great effect. Everyone likes to value their arsenal. You could maybe consider not playing it against like a Prism because they might arsenal a lot of their instants, but even then, it's a great card. It's still probably worth playing because it pops their Phantasm, even though you have a million Phantasm poppers. But I think this is good against the majority of the field. Unfortunately, like I said, it is a little weaker right now because Crown of Seeds is so popular in Starvo, but it's a great card, and it's still worth being in the deck for basically every matchup outside of those Crown of Seeds Guardians. Next up, we've got Massacre here. Massacre is a very powerful brute attack. It says if you've discarded a card with 6 or more power this turn, Massacre gains +2 and Intimidate. And if it's discarded for the cost of a brute attack action card, Intimidate. So great effect. It's a free Intimidate if you discard it to the cost of one of your attack actions. And it actually has a pretty nice effect too if you've already discarded a card by being a 3 for 8 with Intimidate. So it's actually basically a better Alpha Rampage if you've already discarded a card that turn. Next up, we have Pulping here. So Pulping, great brute card. You do need to note that Pulping doesn't block. It has no block value, so you cannot block with this card. But to make up for that, has a really powerful effect. So it's 2 for 6. We're just playing the red here. You draw a card and then discard a random card. If a card with 6 or more power discarded this way, it gains Dominate. And if it's defended by less than 2 non-equipment cards, it has Go Again. So this can be a 2 for 6 with Dominate and Go Again. Really powerful effect. Just make sure you set up so that you can hopefully, discard a 6 or more power card. You are discarding at random, but if your only card in hand is 6 power, you can probably somewhat safely assume the top is 6 power. And even if it's not, you still have a 50-50 to hit the 6 power. So, and the effect at the bottom is always on, so it can always have potential Go Again. So pretty solid card here. Definitely always going to play this. Rolling Thunder is another one of our die rolling cards from Everfest. This is a 1-cost brute action. It has Go Again, and it says roll a 6-sided die. Your next brute attack this turn gains +X, where X is the number rolled. So another way to roll dice, hopefully a 5 or a 6, which would trigger Skull Crushers as well. So if you roll a 5 on this, let's say, you paid 1, your next brute attack gets +5, and then all of your brute attacks get +1 from Skull Crushers. So really, really great card. It always will give at least +1. Hopefully you don't roll a 1, because then that would break your Skull Crushers. But unlike your other equipment, this doesn't have a downside. It just sucks when you roll a 1 because it doesn't give you a lot for its value. You're hoping to at least get kind of the average, which is a 3 or a 4. They balance most of the brute rolling cards around the average die roll, which is a 3 or a 4. So, hopefully you'll get somewhere in that range. But 5 is kind of the ideal, and 6 obviously is the best. This also applies to any brute attack. So, like a lot of brute cards, you need to pay attention because some of them are for only attack actions, but a lot of them are for just all attacks. So if you roll a 5 or 6, that can work on your Romping Club, for example. So if you pitch a blue, play this and get the 6, your Romping Club will come in for 10. So great card there, and it does block for 3, so you'll keep this in all the time. Next up, we've got Savage Feast here, a 1 for 6. As an additional cost to play it, you discard a random card. If the card had 6 or more power, draw a card. So great effect, pretty standard. Not a lot to say here. It blocks for 3 as well. We're playing 2 Sink Belows. These are defense reactions. They're going to be against decks that are pretty aggressive. We'll bring these in, and these will just help us block. We need a little extra blocking against those aggressive decks. And these will help us out there, right? Not a lot to say. It's a pretty standard defense reaction, and it's good for us to bring in against those aggressive decks. Swing Big is a new card from Everfest. This one does not roll dice, but it does a lot of damage. So this is a 2 for 8, which is probably the best rate in the game, but it does have a downside. So if it doesn't hit, the defending hero creates a Quicken token when the combat chain closes, right? So if they block this out fully, if it doesn't deal any damage, they will get a free Quicken token. So you really want it to hit, but the thing is, it's a really great rate, and Quicken tokens are good, but against a lot of decks that really want them, the aggressive decks, they don't want to block, right? So if an Oldhim gets a Quicken token, it doesn't really matter, and those are the decks that are going to block them, right? But if a Katsu gets a Quicken token, that's really good, but also a Katsu is really going to struggle to block 8 here. So it's a really great card with a really great rate, and you pretty much will always run this. It also blocks for 3, so one of the best cards that Everfest added. Wild Ride is another card from Everfest. This is kind of 3 more copies of Pulping. It's a 2 for 6 with no ability to block, so just like Pulping, and whenever you attack with it, you draw a card and then discard a random card. If a card with 6 or more power is discarded this way, it gains Go Again. So like Pulping, it can gain Go Again, although Pulping gains Dominate when you discard a card with 6 or more, and this one just gains Go Again, and it doesn't have the Dominate card. So it's kind of a simpler version of pulping, but pulping's a really great effect, and so we're happy to run 3 more of it. Art of War, we're running 3 of in this deck. I'm not confident we need all 3. We might be able to just do 2, but it's a really solid effect to play off of Fyendal Spring Tunic, like I was saying. This gives all of your attack actions +1, or it can also give Go again, so you can choose either mode. Both are pretty good, and you'll probably always choose the bottom mode, to banish an attack action and draw 2 cards. So this will let you filter your hand out if you need some blues or if you need some reds. You can banish one or the other and hopefully draw into more. This will let you filter your hand, and it also either give your next attack action Go again or just give all your attack actions that turn +1. So great card. It can also pitch it since it's a yellow. It's an instant, so it doesn't block, but great effect. It's a reason it's a staple in a lot of decks. And here in this very aggressive version of Rhinar, we're happy to see it. We're a deck that really wants to find our Blood Rush Bellows, which is this card that we'll get to soon, but card draw helps us get there faster. Next up is 3 copies of Barraging Bighorn Yellow. This is a 2 for 6. As an additional cost to play it, you discard a random card, and while it's defended by less than 2 non-equipment, it has Go again. So the same bottom clause as Pulping. It's a 2 for 6. It also pitches for yellow, which is nice. It blocks for 3. Kind of just a standard brute card here. Beast Within is a brute majestic attack action, and we're actually not looking to play this card. We usually almost never want to attack with it. The main thing is the text box says, if it is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the combat chain, banish the top card of your deck and lose 1 life. If it has 6 or more power, put into your hand, otherwise repeat the process. So we're looking to have this card be discarded from one of our many discard effects. And when you discard it from your hand, its effect will trigger, so you'll banish the top card of your deck. If it's 6 or more power, you'll put it into your hand, otherwise you'll just keep banishing and losing life until you find a 6 or more power. So basically, this will make it so you never actually discarded a card at all. You'll take some damage, but you will still have the same number of cards in hand because you'll draw into a new one with Beast Within. Next up, we've got 3 Swing Big, another really simple brute card. This is a 1 for 6 yellow, blocks for 3, and it is no cost to play it. You discard a random card, so pretty solid rate. Not a lot to say here. Blood Rush at Bellows is the key brute card. So really great card. It costs 1. You're gonna like to play this off Tunic if you can, but otherwise it's okay if you don't. As additional cost to play it, discard a random card, right? So you have to discard a random card to play it. Let's jump to the bottom line. It says, if the discarded card has 6 or more power, draw 2 cards and it gains Go again. So if you don't discard a card with 6 more power, this card does almost nothing. It's pretty bad. So you always want to guarantee that you're discarding a card with 6 or more power. So don't mess around with this card. If you have like a chance to discard a card that's not 6 more power, don't. Get those cards out of your hand, and you are going to want to always discard a card with 6 or more power. This card's amazing. The middle line says your brute attacks gain +2 this turn. This includes weapons, so your Mandible Claws will each come in for 5. You'll draw 2 cards. It's a really powerful card. It's our big damage turns are what comes from Blood Rush Bellows. And against aggressive decks, you'll want to just play one of these out if you have them, and it'll be great. It'll still apply a lot of pressure. If you're against a more controlling deck, you'll want to try to stack 2 of them. So you'll put 1 in your arsenal, and you'll wait until you drew your second one. And then you'll try to use Tunic or just pitch a card to play the one from your hand first, discard, and, draw 2, and then try to play the one from your arsenal. And if you can play both of them and get both of their full effects, you'll have drawn 4 cards and give all of your brute attacks +4. So really insane, a ton of damage. You can probably do 30 damage or more on one of those turns with double Blood Rush Bellows. And that's what we're trying to do against the controlling decks. Against aggressive decks, we're totally fine just doing 1 at a time. But you do want to try to build 2 of them up against those controlling decks. Next up, we have 3 yellow unmovables here. Yellow unmovable is mostly because of Starvo and these big decks that dominate right now. They're not going to be as necessary if dominate decks kind of leave the meta, but they're basically just for decks that can do really tall, really big dominated attacks. It's a yellow because it can still pitch and it's not always useless like a red would be, but pretty solid card. I'm thinking about switching these out for 2 red unmovables and then a 3rd Sink Below, but I think as long as Starvo's around, we're not going to do that. Pretty solid card against Starvo. Blocks from Arsenal for 7, and then you can block with a card from hand and an equipment to block stuff that you need. Next up, we've got yellow Wrecker Romp. We're also running blue Wrecker Romp. The only difference is blue swings for 6 and yellow swings for 7. This is a very simple card. It costs 2, and as additional cost to play it, you discard a random card. And it blocks for 3, and then like I said, the yellow swings for 7 or the blue for 6. We're running 2 energy potions here. These help us set up for those really big Blood Rush Bellows turns. You'll take these out against aggressive decks because they don't block and they're a bit of a liability there. But especially against controlling decks or mid-range decks, these will help us set up for big turns, lets you kind of store some extra resources on the board. They're also a great way to use extra action points. If we rolled Scab Skins and we have 3 action points or 2 action points and we don't need that many, you can play this and it'll use up an action point and you'll still have one left over, right? So kind of a nice way to use those action points. But yeah, really solid card to build up against those decks. We are running the Fabled Eye of Ophidia. I basically love any excuse to play the Fabled cards. If you don't have this card, it's totally okay. Just play a 3rd copy of Energy Potion. It's not that big of a deal. I just like trying to play my Fabled cards. But if you have an Eye of Ophidia, this card's great actually because it opts, and our deck has quite a lot of cards that draw a card off the top and then discard, right? We've got Wild Ride here. We've got Pulping. Is that it? Oh, and then we've also got Blood Rush Bellows that's going to draw off the top, right? So we have quite a few cards that are going to draw off the top and discard. I think actually Skullhorn does as well, yeah. So opting can be quite helpful in this deck. It even helps us opt cards to the bottom to get to our Blood Rush Bellows faster. So I think this card's quite good in Rhinar. Opting is pretty helpful in this deck when we're drawing and discard off the top. Like I said, it also helps us get to our Blood Rush Bellows. It's a blue, so pretty solid card. Like I said, if you don't have it, just want an Energy Potion. But I like getting to use my Fabled cards, and I think opting is pretty good in this deck, especially when you opt to for just free. High Roller is a new card from Everfest. This is a 0-cost brute action with Go Again. It intimidates when you play it. It blocks for 3, and if you rolled a 6 or a 6 on a die this turn, you intimidate twice. So we're not going to play this that often because it's mostly a blue just to pitch or a 3 to block with. But sometimes you roll a 6 on your dice, you'll have this in hand, and for 0, you can intimidate twice, which is really, really good. Once again, Intimidate's not as good against aggro decks, but against a control deck, if you roll a 6 on a dice and then you high roller them to make them intimidate 2 cards, you're going to deal a ton of damage that turn. We're playing our 3 blue Reckless Swings. This card's great because it's a blue, so you can always pitch it, but sometimes it'll be a defense reaction where for the cost of 0, it'll block 4. You will discard a random card, but if the discarded card has 6 or more power, you'll deal 2 damage to the attacking hero. I'm sure we've all died to a Reckless Swing or killed someone with a Reckless Swing, and it's great. It deals 2 damage. They can't block that damage except with Crown of Seeds. So lots of great damage in there, and a lot of times you'll be able to kill someone with this, or you can use 2 and kill someone with 4 damage. Great card. It's a blue, so there's not much of a downside here. And then the last card in the deck is Sand Sketch Plans. This is another one of Rhinar's specializations. It's a 0-cost blue brute action. It is a 3 block. It also has a beautiful border. I love the brute border. And it says search your deck for a card, put it into your hand, and then discard a random card. Shuffle your deck. If the discarded card has 6 or more power, gain 2 action points. So 2 action points means you can play 2 cards. So the first card you'll play will use an action point and have kind of pseudo go again. Great way to just gain some action points on a bigger turn. A lot of the times I suggest just grabbing the Beast Within here. You'll be able to just grab Beast Within, and if it's the only card you're in your hand after you Sand Sketch Plans, you'll discard it. And then you'll draw a new card from Beast Within, and you'll have gained those 2 action points. So pretty solid there, but it can grab anything you really want. I would try to just grab 6 power attacks if you can. If you really, really need to grab a Blood Rush, like if your back's against the wall and you only can win the game by grabbing a Blood Rush Bellow, do it. Obviously don't do it if it'd be the only card in your hand because you'll just discard it. But if you can, make it happen, if you have 2 cards in hand and you can risk doing that, go for it if it's your only option. But typically I recommend just grabbing a Beast Within and get some extra value with some action points and trying to discard that 6 or more power attack. So yeah, a little bit of a longer video, but that's the deck. Really happy with how this deck is performing so far. I'm glad Brute is doing kind of well. It actually is a pretty solid game into Starvo. Better than you'd expect for sure. Beats a lot of those controlling decks right now. Has some game into Viscerai. Has great game into Prism. Great game into Starvo. Those are like the top 3 decks, and I think it has a good win rate against all of them. And then outside of that, we will still be fine. Rhinar's weakness has always been aggressive decks, like low to the ground aggro decks, because he can't block them great, and Intimidate doesn't really hurt them. But there's not a lot of those decks, as many at least, running around right now. So Rhinar's in a great spot. Really happy with how this build works. I love the high rolly aspect. If you don't, totally okay. But I think it can be fun to play sometimes, especially at like a local armory. So pick up your Skull Crushers and start rolling those dice. Yeah, remember to like, subscribe, comment, check out Whooped and Wizard and my Patreon in the description, and I'll see you guys next time.